the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, voiced by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from the exploits of the Incomparable Mulla Nasrudin by Idries Shah. This audio has been made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. The Omen. The king was in a bad mood. As he left the palace to go hunting, he saw Nasrudin.
"It is bad luck to see a mullah on the way to a hunt," he shouted to his guards. "Don't let him stare at me. Whip him out of the way."
They did so. As it happened, the chase was successful. The king sent for Nasrudin.
"I am sorry, mullah. I thought you were a bad omen. You were not, it transpires."
"You thought I was a bad omen?" said Nasrudin. "You look at me and get a full game bag. I look at you and I get a whipping. Who is a bad omen for whom?"
Turnips are harder. The mullah one day decided to take the king some fine turnips which he had grown. On the way he met a friend, who advised him to present something more refined, such as figs or olives. He bought some figs, and the king, who was in a good humour, accepted them and rewarded him. Next week he bought some huge oranges and took them to the palace. But the king was in a bad temper and threw them at Nasrudin, bruising him. As he picked himself up, the mullah realised the truth.
"Now I understand," he said. "People take smaller things rather than heavy ones, because when you are pelted it does not hurt so much. If it had been those turnips, I would have been killed."
How Nasrudin spoke up. Nasrudin said,
"One day a marvellous horse was brought before the prince at whose court I sat. Nobody could ride it because it was far too mettlesome a steed. Suddenly, in the heat of my pride and chivalry, I cried out, 'None of you dare to ride this splendid horse, none of you. None of you can stay on its back.' And I sprang forward."
Someone asked, "What happened?"
"I couldn't ride it either," said the mullah.
In the midst of life. Nasrudin was preaching in a mosque at the time of the Tatar conquest of Western Asia. He was no supporter of Tamerlane. Tamerlane had heard that the mullah was against him, and crept into the mosque dressed as a dervish.
"God will strike the Tartars,"
Nasrudin announced at the end of his sermon.
"He will not grant your prayer," said the dervish, stepping forward.
"And why not?"
asked Nasrudin.
"Because you are being punished for what you have done and what you have not done. There is such a thing as cause and effect. How can anyone be punished for doing something which is itself a chastisement?"
Nasrudin began to feel uncomfortable, for dervishes are not to be trifled with.
"Who are you, and what is your name?"
he asked, blustering a little.
"I am a dervish, and my name is Timur."
A number of the congregation now rose, bows and arrows in their hands. They were disguised members of the Tartar horde. Nasrudin took it all in with a glance.
"Does your name end in lame by any chance?"
"It does," said the dervish. Nasrudin turned to the congregation, who were petrified with fear.
"Brethren, we have performed a congregational prayer. Now we will start the congregational funeral service."
Timur the Lame was so amused that he dismissed the troops and asked Nasrudin to join his court. Awake or asleep? One day Nasrudin noticed that a wonderful new road, a Shah Rah, or King's Highway, had been built at some distance from his house.
"This is something which I must try out," he thought.
He walked along the road for a long time when sleep overcame him. When he woke up, he found that his turban was missing. Someone had stolen it. The next day he started along the road again, hoping to find some trace of the thief. He walked for several miles in the summer heat, and again composed himself to sleep for a while. He was woken by a clatter of hooves and a jingle of harness. A posse was approaching, fierce-looking soldiers of the King's Guard escorting a prisoner. Overcome by curiosity, he stopped them and asked what was going on. "We are taking this man to be beheaded," said the captain, "for he is a guard placed on this road whom we found asleep."
"That is enough for me," said Nasrudin. "You can keep your road. Whoever falls asleep on it loses either his hat or his head. Who knows what the third loss might be?"
And this is the origin of the Persian proverb: whoever falls asleep on the highway loses either his hat or his head. Presently Nasrudin felt his wife shaking him. "Wake up," she said.
"Oh, that's torn it," groaned the mullah. "What you call awake, I call asleep."
The Shortcut. Walking home one wonderful morning, Nasrudin thought that it would be a good idea to take a shortcut through the woods.
"Why," he asked himself, "should I plod along a dusty road when I could be communing with nature, listening to the birds and looking at the flowers? This is indeed a day of days, a day for fortunate pursuits."
So saying, he launched himself into the greenery. He had not gone very far, however, when he fell into a pit where he lay reflecting.
"It is not such a fortunate day after all," he meditated. "In fact, it is just as well that I took this shortcut. If things like this can happen in a beautiful setting like this, what might not have befallen me on that nasty highway?"
Change the subject. One sweltering afternoon, Nasrudin saw a man walking along the dusty road towards him, carrying a big bunch of luscious-looking grapes. A little flattery might be worth a grape.
"Oh, great sheikh, give me a few grapes," said Nasrudin.
"I am not a sheikh," said the dervish, for he was one of those travelling contemplatives who shunned any extreme form of speech.
"He is a man of even greater importance, and I have slighted him," thought the mullah.
Aloud he said,
"Wallah hadrata,
Highness."
give me just one grape."
"I am not a highness," snarled the dervish.
"Well, don't tell me what you are, or we will probably find out that those are not grapes either. Let's change the subject."
The Rope and the Sky. A Sufi mystic stopped Nasrudin in the street. In order to test whether the mullah was sensitive to inner knowledge, he made a sign pointing at the sky. The Sufi meant, "There is only one truth which covers all." Nasrudin's companion, an ordinary man, thought, "The Sufi is mad. I wonder what precautions Nasrudin will take." Nasrudin looked in a knapsack and took out a coil of rope. This he handed to his companion. "Excellent," thought the companion. "We will bind him up if he becomes violent." The Sufi saw that Nasrudin meant, ordinary humanity tries to find truth by methods as unsuitable as attempting to climb into the sky with a rope. Who am I? After a long journey, Nasrudin found himself amid the milling throng in Baghdad. This was the biggest place he had ever seen, and people pouring through the streets confused him.
"I wonder how people manage to keep track of themselves, who they are in a place like this," he mused.
Then he thought,
"I must remember myself well, otherwise I might lose myself."
He rushed to a caravanserai. A wag was sitting on his bed next to the one which Nasrudin was allotted. Nasrudin thought that he would have a siesta, but he had a problem: how to find himself again when he woke up. He confided in his neighbour. "Simple," said the joker. "Here is an inflated bladder. Tie it around your leg and go to sleep. When you wake up, look for the man with the balloon, and that will be you."
"Excellent idea," said Nasrudin.
A couple of hours later, the mullah awoke. He looked for the bladder and found it tied to the leg of the wag.
"Yes, that is me," he thought.
Then, in a frenzy of fear, he started pummeling the other man.
"Wake up! Something has happened, as I thought it would. Your idea was no good."
The man woke up and asked him what the trouble was. Nasrudin pointed to the bladder.
"I can tell by the bladder that you are me, but if you are me, who, for the love of goodness, am I?"
I'd have shown you.
"Some people," said the mullah to himself one day, "are dead when they seem to be alive. Others again are alive although they seem to be dead. How can we tell if a man is dead or if he is alive?"
He repeated this last sentence so loudly that his wife heard. She said to him, "Foolish man! If the hands and feet are quite cold, you can be sure that he is dead." Not long afterwards, Nasrudin was cutting wood in the forest when he realized that his extremities were almost frozen by the bitter cold.
"Death,"
he said,
"now seems to be upon me. The dead do not cut wood. They lie down respectably, for they have no need of physical movement."
He lay down under a tree. A pack of wolves, emboldened by their sufferings during that harsh winter, and thinking the man dead, descended upon the mullah's donkey and ate it.
"Such is life," the mullah reflected. "One thing is conditional upon another. Had I been alive, you would not have taken such liberties with my donkey."
Only one thing wrong with it. Walking with a disciple one day, Mulla Nasrudin saw for the first time in his life a beautiful Lakeland scene.
"What a delight!" he exclaimed. "But if only...
If only what, master?"
"If only they had not put water into it."
Duck soup. A kinsman came to see Nasrudin from the country and brought a duck. Nasrudin was grateful, had the bird cooked and shared it with his guest. Presently another visitor arrived. He was a friend, as he said, of the man who gave you the duck. Nasrudin fed him as well. This happened several times. Nasrudin's home had become like a restaurant for out-of-town visitors. Everyone was a friend at some removes of the original donor of the duck. Finally, Nasrudin was exasperated. One day there was a knock at the door and a stranger appeared. "I am the friend of the friend of the friend of the man who brought you the duck from the country," he said.
"Come in,"
said Nasrudin. They seated themselves at the table, and Nasrudin asked his wife to bring the soup. When the guest tasted it, it seemed to be nothing more than warm water. "What sort of soup is this?" he asked the mullah.
"That," said Nasrudin, "is the soup of the soup of the soup of the duck."
This podcast is copyright 2016, the Idries Shah Foundation.